Please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
President Daly?
Here.
Vice President Headland?
Here.
Trustee Clements? Here. Trustee McNall? Here. And Trustee Parr?
Here. Thanks for being here, everybody. Our next Board of Education meeting will be on Tuesday, April 20th at 7 p.m. right here in the auditorium. And the workshop topic will be the elementary school detail report. For those who have not been following along, we've been having different detail reports throughout the year, and it's the elementary school turn. The Board of Education trustee candidate petitions are available. We have 2 seats up for election. Those who are interested should contact Catherine Platt, our district clerk, through her email, cplatt@haldaneschool.org, or stop into the district office. You need to pick up a petition packet, and those petition packets are due on Monday, April 19th at 5 p.m. So there is still time for anyone who is interested, and all of us here on the board would be more than happy to speak to anybody interested about what we do, what we don't do, and we welcome your candidacy. And that is it from me. I'll turn it over to Dr. Benante.
Thank you, Jen. And good evening, everyone. And I hope everyone had a restful spring break and had some time for some rest and family. I do have a few updates this evening. One, and I think most importantly that I want to start with is just wanted to bring to the board's attention a letter that I sent to the community this evening. If you haven't seen it yet, it should be in your email. It just went out a couple of hours ago. And over the spring recess, I probably had a little more time than I've had leading up to it, just to catch up on some news, some things that are going on in the world and in our communities, and was really just increasingly concerned about the rise in anti-Asian and Pacific Islander violence that's been taking place. Really, not only the incident that occurred in Georgia a few weeks ago, but incidents that continue to happen in communities throughout our country, and really underscore yet again long-standing issues regarding race or xenophobia in our country. And I felt it was important to put something out to the community just to indicate that these acts stand in stark opposition of our values as a school community. We value inclusivity and an appreciation for cultural differences in our school, and we have a lot to gain through that. And we have a lot to gain as a country through that, I believe, if we give ourselves the space to. And also just being encouraged that we continue to promote among our teaching staff, leaning into these very conversations in our classrooms in a developmentally appropriate way, regardless of the age of our students. It's just as important in kindergarten as it is among our upperclassmen. And I learned a long time ago, someone had shared with me, there's really only 2 basic emotions that we all experience. Every other one is an extension of either love or fear. And obviously, you can't help but to think that these acts stem from a fear that something is somehow lost in opening ourselves or our communities to people who look different than me or you or others, instead of what's potentially gained in extending an open hand to people who may seem different than us. And as a teacher, I struggle with it. I taught 4th and 5th grades, and I remember the time, we don't do this so much anymore, but every 4th grader in the Hudson Valley would likely have a field trip to the Statue of Liberty. That was a very common field trip at the time when I taught. Changed a little bit after 9/11 for obvious reasons, but it used to be a standard part of a child's elementary school experience. And we would talk about the 7 points on the crown of the Statue of Liberty and what they represented. And there's kind of dual symbolism there between the 7 seas and continents of the world, but also the 7 types of liberty and freedom that citizens of our country would come to experience, one of which was civil liberty. And, we're in a time where civil liberty is being discussed in many different ways, especially as it relates to race and racism. And I think, in our schools at least, these continued acts give us pause to re-examine our values and how our actions as a school community align with the very best ideals of our country. And more often than not, unfortunately of late, many groups in our country continue to struggle to have those ideals reflected back to them in the actions that they encounter in our communities. And I hope that Haldane, over time, continues to be a place that stands for those ideals, and our community members see that reflected back to them in their interactions with our school, and the kids see that in their interactions in our classrooms. I know we have work to do, but we're committed to that. So that's a little more than I wrote in the letter, but I just wanted to draw your attention to that, and obviously something that we're thinking a lot about right now. Transitioning to just a standard update, which is COVID-related items, I just wanted to report that we are on track to welcome back our high school students on April 19th. We continue to work towards that. I have another meeting with the reopening task force tomorrow, and would like to thank right now that committee for their efforts over the last the 2 weeks preceding spring break, and again tomorrow. And particularly I want to thank Tim Walsh and Julia Sniffen, who have been very active behind the scenes in ensuring that the high school is ready for all students to come back on the 19th, and we look forward to that, and that it's an important day for us. Hopefully, again, I don't want to get too far out ahead of it, but that would be the first day since last March 15th that we've actually had the full school community, or the ability to have the full school community on campus at one time. So it's an important day for us, and we're working very hard to make that happen for our kids and for their families and for ourselves. With that, I'll just pause there, see if there's any questions about the school reopening. Okay. And I briefly, Jen, if I can just transition, instead of doing the budget presentation first, I'd like to actually talk about the website transparency audit, because I think that's a more brief conversation, if I may. So I don't have a slide deck for this. I did want to draw the board's attention to it. It is in the file content and board docs. So we last February, around that time, we went through an audit with the comptroller's office regarding school district website transparency. And the spirit of this audit was to ensure that the community had access to important information related to the school budget and the school budget development process. And there were a few other miscellaneous items, but that was the bulk of the emphasis within the audit. And I'd just like to bring the board's attention to, on page 3 of the report, there is a chart, it's figure 1, that really summarizes in chart form what items were examined within the audit, and there were 10. And the chart accurately summarizes, 1, did we have the information there, yes or no? And is it required to have been on the website, yes or no? Because the audit really spanned required practices on the part of school districts, and then also just recommended best practices. They're not necessarily required by any state law, but they are best practices that the comptroller's office is promoting. So I'm just going to go through, and I've asked Ann just to come to the mic in case there's anything that needs further explanation. The first being the school budget. The original budget that the board adopted for vote that was posted on our website. It is required for it to be posted on our website. We were in a good place there. The final annual budget, the auditors determined, was not posted on the website, and it is required, and that was one of their more major findings. I will say this is a simple correction for us. We had it posted, we did not have it labeled as final annual budget. So we didn't have it labeled as such. So that's, from a transparency perspective, the auditors determined that's not the level of transparency or clarity that that's required. While it's an easy fix, it's still a citation within the audit. The multi-year financial plan was probably the second significant finding of the audit. While we are not required to develop a budget or to develop a multi-year financial plan, and we don't, it is recommended as a best practice that we do. So Ann and I have discussed this, and that's something that we'll begin to consider in next year's development of the budget and the district's financial plan. It does help. Districts do this, and we're certainly open to examining our work here through that lens. And I think it would be helpful to the board and to the community as a whole to see the longer-term implications, so beyond year 1, year 2, year 3, of decisions that are made here with the Board of Education. The budget to actual spending reports were included. They are not required. And then moving into some of the the information away from the school budget now, just other reports that the auditors were looking for. Our external audit was posted. It is required. The corrective action plan was not posted. That's because we had a great external audit. There were no findings, so there was no corrective action plan to post. The state comptroller's audit, which was conducted, I believe, in 2016, and if I'm not mistaken.
Go ahead.
Does that sound right? Okay. Was posted. That is required. The corrective action plan for that audit in 2016 was posted. That is required. The internal audit and corrective action plans were not posted. They're not required. We are exempt from that. So the findings were relatively were important to consider, but relatively minor, I think, in terms of whether or not the district is acting in a transparent manner. But we obviously look at any audit as an opportunity to reflect upon our practices against not only what's required, but what may be best practices in the field, and we're prepared to do so. So I'll pause there. That's just a brief summary. If there's any questions that Ann or I can answer.
Does every school district go through this? I mean, how were we picked?
No, every district does not go through it. So we were selected at random. And the comptroller's office will indicate that they try to select a cross-section of districts throughout New York State that range in size. So they want large districts to be a part of the audit. They want relatively small districts like ours to be a part of the audit, and also across different regions of the state. So an explanation of how we were selected, I think, is included at the end somewhere. But the bottom line is we get picked. I'm not sure how the randomizer that we're picked out of to be a part of it.
So everybody's not going to get, like, to me, this is really helpful. Like that
Right.
someone looked at it and said, this is what you need that will make it even more transparent.
Sure.
And I feel like we are a very transparent school district. So for someone to point out, oh, you missed it, and we didn't really miss it. It was there, but it was
there.
buried in a place that you had to really look for it. So to me, this is a really good kind of audit.
Yeah, I think that generally the findings in relation to what could be found or not found, I guess, in relation to this scope were largely positive. The citations, again, were quite minor when we talk about what's labeled. But the spirit of it is to obviously make sure that any community member who can easily access information about the school budget and also any audits that are related to the school's finances. So I think we get that. We get why that's important, and we should always be checking in on that to make sure that our practices are aligned with best practices, and also that generally that information is readily accessible. One of the interesting flows or diagrams on here in these figures was the auditors actually went through how many, like the pathway that it takes, so how many clicks, if this is all on our website, it would take to get to certain information. And I think we all experience this when we visit websites. Sometimes, if you have to click too many times, you're like, I just give up. And I think we want to keep that in mind as we're loading information onto our webpage. How much does someone have to sort through who's may not necessarily be in the know of the district's operations and know where everything lands? Is it relatively easy to navigate? So that's something for us to always consider as well in our website design and facilitation.
Yeah, I have to admit, sometimes I go to New York State and pull down the Excel spreadsheet,
Right.
just to pull down. But I did have a question. I think this was just for the prior year. the audit was looking at 1920 or 1819 or something like that.
Correct. It
Is
was
that
a
right?
one-year window.
Okay, yep.
With the exception of the previous audit, comptroller audit documents.
Yep. So would you go back and basically apply the best practice that you've picked up here back into the depths of our budget as far as we can go? In other words, making that transparency available as to the best that we can?
Yes.
Okay.
I think, and we made some changes last year or 2 years ago as well to bring budget-related documents more, to organize them differently in the drives that they're
Yeah,
contained in.
yeah.
They were a bit, everything was in there, kind of in all one spot.
Yes.
So we,
I agree.
I know, did a year-by-year sort on those. Again, we kind of come into it at different points, and we know that the summer is a good time to step back and really re-examine the entire website. That's when we normally would do that. Last summer was unique, and we just didn't have an opportunity to go through a next series of revisions as we had been doing in the previous 2 summers. I'm inclined to think that this summer will be a little bit different. We'll be able to get back to some of that.
Yeah, and I think your point is just the labeling character, like you go back a couple of years and they're slightly different of how people put the final budget in or the
Yes.
final administrative.
Right.
And there's invariably multiple versions of the presentations.
Yes.
Before, yeah, so, yeah, great. I always find the stuff I need, but
Great, thank you. Thank you, Ann.
We'll have more comptroller audit information to share down the road, because I think we're in the middle of another audit now. So
We're constantly in the middle of it.
we are. It does seem.
Ann is constantly either wrapping one up or starting one.
I
or
do
something.
appreciate Margaret's question about how are we selected for these, because we always seem to be selected, like perpetual audit mode. Thank you. And I do want to thank Ann and Megan. Am I forgetting anybody, Ann, from last year that was highly involved in this other than you and Megan? Yeah. Right. No, we appreciate it, because it did span the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and it was, talk about less than ideal. So the auditors were great. They were very understanding of the situation that we were in. Obviously, we wanted to fulfill, our requirements there. Okay. With that, I'll transition to budget. So I'm actually going to speak from the podium just so I can
Yeah,
view the
I'm
slide
gonna
deck.
go a little.
Thank you. And a copy of tonight's slide deck should be loaded into board docs. It's also in the publicly accessible folder, so anybody who's watching at home that wants to go through these slides in more detail is welcome to. A level, just scooting around. So we've arrived at a place that allows us, we think, through the budget development process, to maintain our school's reputation for academic and extracurricular excellence during times of increased uncertainty. And there's encouraging news that's been coming out of Albany today. I won't get into too much of that, but it does seem like things are moving in a good direction for us. But as you know, in the previous month to 6 weeks, we really had a lot of uncertainty around the budget development process in comparison to previous years, with the unclarity around how federal stimulus dollars would make it their way to us, and at what amount, in addition to knowing that state aid, at least initially, was anticipated to remain flat, our levy remaining relatively low as compared to previous years. It was a more complicated budget development process. I appreciate the board's time and our community members' time leading up to this, because there was a lot of checking in that I felt was important that we do to put us in a good position to arrive at a recommendation for this evening that that was palatable to the community and also to the board. So just with that, I'll go through a little bit of background information, and then we'll get into a little more detail. This is our second full year since we drafted our strategic coherence plan. And we went into the budget development process seeking to, again, keep the main thing, with a focus on remaining in a good position to think about our program, how our program is designed, how our academic program is implemented, and ensuring that we are taking steps towards bringing a level of intention into the Haldane essentials and how they're taught in our classroom. Critical thinking, problem solving, communication skills, and the three other essentials that are not as academically focused. And we feel that we've done this through the budget development process. There's still a healthy level of funding in curriculum development and design. There's obviously a level of support and oversight that we included 2 years ago that will remain in this budget development process. We see that as essential from a facilitation standpoint internally, and we feel that our budget does a good job also of maintaining certain program expectations that our community has come to have, specifically small class sizes that really emphasize the importance of the relationships between our students, their families, and our teachers. The COVID pandemic is something that we've really had to consider going into next school year, because while our class sizes are very healthy, and you've heard me talk about before, sometimes there is a sweet spot, and sometimes I worry that we might be getting a little too biased in certain areas towards low class sizes where we could reorganize differently and perhaps use that funding elsewhere and still have very competitive class sizes. But I think at least going into next school year, there's going to continue to remain keep our class sizes where they are to ensure that our students have broad access to in-person instruction should they desire it, at least until if and when distancing guidelines change, which have not yet in New York. As I mentioned earlier, the low tax cap combined with little additional state aid gave us a sense of greater perceived stress. Our per pupil expenditures remain very low in comparison to our peer groups. And that's something that I think we can attribute to lower levies in years past. And as I've said, right now, if we have the opportunity to levy to the limit, I believe we should. And I feel the board has supported this in the previous 2 years' budget development processes. This is just an overview of those levy limits, as well as the budget-to-budget increases. And as you can see, looking into next year by the bars on the far right, in comparison to the preceding 4 years, we are at a lower budget-to-budget increase and a lower levy limit. And just again, a visual representation of our per pupil expenditure. Haldane, in comparison to our peer group, has the lowest per pupil expenditure. At this point, we provide a great program at a great cost to our community. As you know, when we went into budget development for this year, we did develop an anticipated budget gap of $1.2 million, which in comparison to previous years was a significant gap. And this is mostly attributed to the restraints or constraints on revenue, being state aid and also how much we could levy. In some years, one of those is low in relation to the other. It's not common to have both remain relatively low, and they did or will be so next year. There's hope, as I said, there's encouraging news coming out of Albany that there will be an adjustment to our foundation aid. That would be great for us, but we're not there yet. So this is as of today, obviously, and we know that some of the budget development at a state level has been slower to develop this year. Again, this is just an anticipated budget gap depicted in a different way. Our rollover budget, $26.8 million. Our estimated revenue, $25.6 for a deficit of $1.2 million. As you're aware, the administration then chose the approach to look at different facets of our operation to determine if we could operate differently through these areas. We looked at our administrative organization, the use of our support staff, use of related service staff, class size and structure. We also looked at any potential sources of revenue, notably Garrison's tuition costs. And we also evaluated the use of our reserve funds to see if there was any particular strategy that we could employ through the use of reserve funds to further offset our budget deficit. And we arrived at these reductions being made, or recommending that these reductions be made in preparation for next year's budget. We had the ability to create, we created one separate admin position, and as I spoke to you in February, we had the ability to create another. We are recommending to consolidate those two positions. We had an elementary school teacher retire. We're recommending and do not see a need to fill that position while still keeping our class sizes relatively low. We had an elementary special education teacher retirement, and or an anticipated retirement, and we will realize breakage in that retirement. We do we had a special education teacher resign her position for a new position elsewhere at the middle of the school year. We have not filled that position, and we do not foresee a need to going into next school year. I would like to point out we do anticipate additional special ed placement costs. It's reflected lower here. It's not a reduction, it's an add as well. So sometimes, depending on the needs of a student, if we had a student who was in-house but now is going to an out-of-district program that had special ed staffing assigned to them, obviously that creates a void if and in that case, these are done on a projection basis. So this is as we stand today based on some of our projections. We hired 2 interventionists at the beginning of the school year to assist through the teaching of remote students through the pandemic. We are not going to continue with those 2 positions going into next school year. We had breakage on a high school guidance counselor position. Probably the most significant reduction comes through a real reexamination of how we're deploying our support staff. 2 TAs, a full-time aide, and then several part-time aides, and feeling that we can continue to support students or provide a level of program support for students, both general ed, around the general education environment in particular, while reducing staff or not filling positions that are currently vacant. I do want to note, because this was an important point of clarification in our community forums, that if there's any aid support that is attached or for a student with an IEP or special education program, those supports continue to be provided. We don't always, we anticipate or we can anticipate a certain level of support that's going to be needed based on our projection process, but the annual review process does not end until really June, and it kind of goes on in a more limited fashion through the summer months. So this is not going to limit in any way our ability to provide such support to our special education students. We made some other program adjustments or shifted, worked with our community partners to fund certain extracurricular programs through grants and offset the cost to the district. We made an adjustment in the budget to the credits that we pay for teachers who take additional in-service opportunities. We saw that we were over budgeted in that area. And as I mentioned in previous presentations, through the teacher's retirement system, the final rate adjustment was in our favor. And through our district's refinancing of some of our debt, we were able to realize lower interest rates and additional savings there. So with all of this, we arrived at approximately $900,000 in reductions, but we still have a remaining deficit of $292,000, and I'd just like to speak to this in the next few slides. So as you're aware, and as I mentioned earlier, lawmakers did not meet the deadline for the state budget by April 1st, but it does seem that's coming to a resolution now. There is a prioritization of an increase to school aid levels, which is great news for us. We're looking at, right now, a conservative estimate of 2% increase to our aid, which would yield an additional $60,000 for Haldane. May come in higher, that'd be great. We think based on what we're hearing through our respective associations, we would yield about a 2% increase. And we should learn more about this in the coming days. The also good news is both the Senate and the Assembly have rejected the local district funding adjustment, which we thought was going to be a factor this year. That was included in the governor's executive proposal. That works in our favor to an additional $100,000. So if we were to combine those two funds, our deficit is reduced to $132,000. So kind of gradually working back to put ourselves in a much better position. We would then, considering that deficit, applying $132,000 from the retirement contribution reserve to cover the remaining deficit. And this can be done without any additional adverse effects on the forecasted retirement system rate increases. So Ann has worked through that and feels that would be, if we were to use our reserve funds, that would be the most appropriate use of our reserves considering the current context. And I'd like to say if additional aid beyond what we're projecting right now were to come in, we would just further offset this. It'd be most ideal not to have to do that, but if we had to, we can do so and it not have a dramatic impact on next year's budget. Now, I included a slide related to a contingency plan if we did not have additional aid from the state. I don't think we're heading in this direction, but I just did want to speak to it just in case, because you never know what may transpire. The final state budget may raise the level of fund balance from the current 4% cap. You may have read about some of this in your NISBA updates, and again, that can really help us. So that was one strategy that some lawmakers were promoting in the event that aid was not going to increase, because it would provide districts with the ability, again, to apply a particular strategy to offset anticipated budget deficits. So if that were to occur, we could apply excess fund balance to the 21-22 budget, perhaps beyond what we normally would do, with the understanding that it's non-recurring revenue. And I think Ann has provided an overview at our last meeting of some of the concern that comes when you're taking too much fund balance and applying it in the budget. It creates a void that you then have to fill the following year. But if we were allowed to carry more than the 4% cap, it would be an opportunity to do so without impacting the district's long-term financial state. It would obviously give us time. So we typically don't provide the overview of the three-part budget at this meeting. We usually do that at the public hearing, but I felt comfortable providing you with this information. And it is a template, if you will, that we work from early on in the budget development process. So I'm not going to go through these in great detail because they're more for your reference and for questions that you may have. You've seen these before, but I would just draw your attention to the last column, proposed 21-22, which provides you with the most updated information in relation to when you would have last seen this in January or early February as to our the different components of the budget and our proposed spending in those areas. One thing I don't want to over scrutinize this, but I know that it's been it got a little bit of attention as we were talking about administration. I would just draw your attention to the percentages as a component of our budget for each segment. So admin, capital, and program, sorry. Our spending in administration has remained relatively stable. So I just don't want it to be lost that I think the strategy, or what I may have not communicated clearly enough, was that how we're trying to organize our administration is largely looking at monies that are already included in the budget, just reorganizing how those monies are organized, how those positions are organized to better meet the needs of the district. So our spending in admin has remained relatively stable over the last few years. Similarly, in capital, if we're looking at what's really driving our costs, and it shouldn't really be a surprise, the majority of our staffing is incorporated into program, as it should be. And that's where, we're going to see the most significant increase in costs for the time being is going to come out of that program component of the budget. Again, it's not a bad thing, but in terms of where costs are being driven or what's driving the increased costs in the budget, it's really program that's doing that. Okay, so the component summary is here for your review as well. And as we can't forget, we're also going to have a second proposition that would be included in the budget for a vehicle proposition. This is part of the regular cycle that we are on. I'll have more to share about this, obviously, when we're speaking to the community who understands the dynamics of this. These are often budget-neutral propositions. It helps us maintain our existing fleet of buses. After a period of time, we have to take certain vehicles off the road by state law. And this, our proposal this year, we anticipate one bus replacement and 2 minivans that will finance over a 5-year period. So with that, Ann and I will pause for questions. I'm sorry, I forgot one last thing the board's familiar with is just the anticipated tax impact. So at a tax levy increase of 1.88%, depending on the market value of your home, these are the anticipated tax increases that one would see to their tax bill. Again, the increase from the amount that's currently being paid, so not the overall taxes. But if you have an assessed home or home market value, of $500,000, this proposed budget would approximately cause an increase of $160 to the school tax bill that homeowner would be paying. Okay. So all things considered, we feel we've developed a budget that maintains our core values as a school district, things that make us unique as a school community going into next school year through a time that was quite difficult to, as you know, to develop a budget for the upcoming school year. I do think, again, in the next few days, we'll have a little bit more information about anticipated state aid, so we'll be able to provide the board with an update on how that will influence budget development process. But as it comes to the levy, the amount the board can levy from the community or put before the community to levy, we're recommending, obviously, levying up to that limit, and we still feel within that is a very competitive balance between academics, athletics, and the arts for our students for next school year. So I'm going to come back to the seat, and I'll come up to the microphone, and we can answer questions that the board may have.
Questions for Ann or Dr. Benante?
Sure, I've got a couple. I always get confused, and that's because I get confused. Remind me, okay, breakage means a teacher retires and invariably we have long tenured who have gone through steps and are well paid, compensated for their time and their experience, and we end up hiring a teacher who is less tenured, in fact, maybe not tenured at all, and the breakage is the delta between those two. So it is not somebody going away and not filling the position.
That's
right?
correct.
Is that right? Okay. So of those two, there are two, the term is always a little bit wonky for me. So it's basically we're getting a cheaper person than net, and we're realizing that savings.
That's
right?
correct.
Okay. So, and then there are a couple on here, the teacher retirement and the 2 interventionists and the high school special education are actual, I'm not getting into the TAs or the, but those are positions that are going away.
Correct.
Okay, great, good, thank you, that's useful. And I think you made this comment, but I'd reinforce and just remind myself that as the special education process plays out through the rest of the spring and into the summer, if and when, probably, any child goes through the process and the program to address that child's needs requires the hiring of a teacher, that regardless of whatever we pass in the budget, that will happen. Okay, all right.
Yeah, and depending on what those needs are, it's unique to go through a process where a child would require their own teacher.
Right.
And that's something that we take into consideration. Each of our special educators carries a certain caseload.
Yeah, okay.
More often than not, they're teaching multiple students. Right. And what we want to be wary of is what that number is.
Right.
And then how that impacts their assignment. Does that spread them apart across too many classrooms potentially? And that's something that we always have an eye on.
Okay.
But generally, but yes, to answer your question and
Yeah,
reiterate.
At its most fundamental level, if there's an investment required to meet the needs of a special education student that is uncovered after the budget is set, okay.
We always provide it.
I think it's important to remember that a budget is just, a projection,
Yep.
right? It's not set in stone.
Right.
And just like this year, perfect example, we didn't budget in 2 interventionists.
Right.
It's just ended up that we needed them. And so we figured it out and made some adjustments, right?
Yeah.
So same thing would happen in a special education case. Adjustments would be made as necessary.
And the process for those adjustments is actually really quite transparent, right? Because they come through in our financial reports as
Yeah.
budget transfer documents,
Yes,
right?
that's
So it's not, this isn't something that's mysteriously happening behind the scenes. It
Yeah.
happens very transparently.
Yes.
I'm just looking to you to make sure I'm not misstating anything. I think I'm right, but I'm never sure. I'm not always sure.
And so my last question would be option C. So option A is the state comes through with funding. We have $102,000, $32,000 gap. We fill that with basically savings that have been allocated for retirement. We take some of those savings that have been allocated for retirement. We use them to because every year we have retirement costs, we use some of those savings to fulfill those retirement costs. Fine. Option B, the state doesn't come through with anything. We think there may be an opportunity to carry over more than 4%. We fill. Option C, the state doesn't come through and they don't increase the 4%.
It seems less likely
Okay.
now than it
All
did
right.
a month ago.
Okay.
And I think that's good news.
Good.
That we're going to get something.
Something's okay.
Yeah. I'm sure Ann has thought about option C more than I have
Okay. All right.
right now. But as we started to see indications that we were moving away from that scenario, and each passing week has only indicated that that's less likely.
Okay.
We've spent less time on it.
Okay. All right. Fair.
I think, and part of that, John, is you, and as the board knows, we had other reductions or potential area for reductions that were included in my initial budget presentation. And as we've been able to and had a greater sense of confidence, we've taken those out.
Mm-hmm.
Because the option C would be go to further into
Right.
making reductions, but we don't want to. It's a difficult balance to maintain of making a community aware of what may be coming, but not causing any unnecessary alarm. And I'd say if we had one more week, we wouldn't have had to provoke any unnecessary alarm. But we did think a month ago that option C, if you will, very well may have played out. So we did have other potential areas for reduction that we would consider, that we'd bring back in and as part of our recommendation. But I don't think we're going to be in that position.
So do we have any projection of when we'll be really sure option C isn't going to be a problem?
It sounds like within a week.
Within a week?
Yeah, it very well could be by the time this meeting's over and we look at our email again.
Okay.
Because every hour today we were getting more clarity on what very well may be the resolution at a state level to the budget. And all signs are encouraging. We just don't know. It's similar to the federal stimulus money in that we don't know, based on what we're hearing today, what the actual dollar impact will be for Haldane. And that's going to take a couple days. So it ultimately culminates in an updated chart that we get sent to us with our updated school aid runs. And those are usually released, last year I found one on Twitter. So depending on what media source you're observing, you could be a day between when you're actually getting it. And, so I think in the next few days we'll see it.
We're soon, okay.
I have one final, very technical question. Is there a list? Do we know all the properties that are assessed that pay property tax?
I believe we do.
Yes.
And okay, is that public information?
Yes, it is.
I'm interested in that. There's not a lot of building going on, but like the total value of the community went up last year, this year?
Yeah.
I think with Butterfield primarily, but I'm interested in how that plays out.
When I'm sure you know this, and I'm sorry for putting you on the spot if you don't, but I feel like I've lived through this once or twice before. When the assessor, the market value, is increasing in a community, and I think Cold Spring and Phillipstown in general, we've seen that. I think through the coherence planning process, we actually looked at that. It doesn't necessarily equate, though, to increased revenue for the school. Correct?
Correct.
I was talking about something different. When a significant portion of new taxable quantity comes, that could have the impact of decreasing the tax or lowering the impact for everybody who was already there because you're having new parcels that are now being taxed. Okay.
That happened last year, which is why our tax rate increase wasn't as large, because a lot of the Butterfield condominiums came onto the tax roll.
Got it.
And so our increase was even lower last summer.
Yep.
When even though the board put $50,000 of excess fund balance towards the tax levy, it already had come in under the estimate because of that. They anticipate a little bit more. There's not a whole lot of new building going on as far as brick and mortar goes.
Right.
So we look forward to that because we do have conversations with the assessor's office. But each year, the new assessments, it does go up because when properties change hand, then the property is reassessed. But as the market doesn't really affect it because the equalization rate changes, and that keeps things steady. Fishkill is a very small piece of our tax levy, and so is Putt Valley. So 96% is Phillipstown and Cold Spring, and they're only at 0.46 for an equalization rate. So that equalization rate is going to change, but that distribution is, we're good with our projections, except for new. And I've never seen it go down, even if it goes up a little, which is why our estimate, I'm pretty confident. I don't like to put numbers out there that someone could come back and say, you said, but so I'm confident that what we present, it's going to come in under.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any more questions about the budget? I know we've been living with this for a while. Feels like we've gotten to a really good, clear place with it. Thank you to Anne and Dr. Benante for their work. And as a reminder to us, the board will be asked to adopt this budget proposal at our next meeting on April 20th. So if there are further questions or concerns between now and then, you should bring them up. And we might have some more information as well throughout the week to solidify the proposal as well.
Are there any more community touch points or fora or something?
I think after we do the adoption, Dr. Benante will get the show on the road.
That's when we do the road show, get out the vote
Yeah.
piece. But we front loaded the community check-ins
Yes.
prior to break, just given the unique circumstances. And there aren't any currently scheduled between now and the 20th. However, if there was a desire to do so, just as if that would be helpful to the board, I certainly can put one together.
No, I think it makes sense to wait till the piece is complete, and then we'll have about a month to get the word out. Yeah. Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you very much. Is there any communication from the public at this time? Oh, good. Oh, Maggie, I'm going to read the rules then. The Haldane Board of Education desires and values input from the entire school community. For those who wish to address the board, please sign in and state your name for the record. The sign-in sheet is with Ms. Platt. Please keep your remarks to 3 minutes or less. Disparaging remarks and discussion of district personnel are prohibited. Although we do not engage in dialogue, we are listening. Please leave your contact information with our district clerk, and a prompt response will follow from either myself or Dr. Benante. Okay, now you can come to the point.
So, I'm Maggie Valentine. I'm a parent of a 4th grader and a 1st grader. I'm also a softball coach for Phillipstown Little League, kindergarten and 1st grade, which I got my voice back a little bit. Today was our first practice, and it was insane. But on behalf of Little League, I just wanted to thank Dr. Benante and the school for allowing us, like you do every year, to share the field, share the Haldane softball diamond and Lower Perkins. It is especially significant this year because we have over 70 children signed up for softball, which in terms of participation number is our biggest year in at least a decade. So it's exciting, and it's aspirational for many of the children, I should say, to play on that field. So I just wanted to thank you for that. It's exciting. I also wanted to thank the board members for all the questions that you ask all year long, especially now during the budget process. I know a lot of parents who, for whatever reason, don't ask a lot of questions. They appreciate it. They're listening. They want more questions. It gives them obviously a level of clarity. And I also wanted to announce my intention to run for the school board. And I look forward to potentially working with some of you. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Any other communication from the public? Okay, going into our information reports, they are here for anyone's viewing pleasure. Consent agenda minutes, may I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
These are our minutes from the March 16th and the March 23rd meetings. Are there any questions, discussion? All those in favor? Aye. The committee minutes are here for our review, Buildings and Grounds Committee and the Technology Committee. Consent agenda financial, may I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Consent agenda personnel, may I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Please.
I'm sorry, Jen. Just on the approval of 2 full-time bus drivers
yeah,
that
sure.
just wanted to mention to the board, we've had a hard time filling the part-time bus driver positions. When that occurs, we have to pull our shared maintenance transportation workers out of their maintenance role to ride the bus, which creates a stress, obviously, in keeping up with certain maintenance responsibilities, which are really important, obviously, right now, especially as it relates to cleaning. So we feel that by consolidating the part-time positions into 2 full-time positions, we'll get a better candidates who are more inclined to take the position and alleviate some of the stress that we're seeing right now on our shared position. So this is ultimately budget neutral because we're going to eliminate the part-time driver positions once these are filled.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
We're going into new business. There's only 1 item listed, but there's actually 3, and I apologize. They're kind of last-minute things that happened over spring break, so don't get too excited. There are a couple more things after 1. So CSE, CPSE recommendations. Ms. Platt.
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the recommendations of the Committees on Special Education and Preschool Special Education as presented.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
So just two other things. The first thing is that the Garrison School Board had talked to us about potentially doing an equity, diversity, and inclusion training with them. And they are moving forward with that and trying to nail down some dates for a summer retreat. And Margaret, I don't have to look at you for this because you're not, you won't be there. So I'm just going to share the two dates with you that they're trying to consolidate their 9-person board plus superintendent around. So it's like, or 7-person board, 7-person board and the superintendent. So they've started this early. Typically we wait till like the new board members are all elected to talk about summer, but I'm just going to, the process is starting. So they've thrown out two dates, July 17th or August 28th. Both are Saturdays. And both Dr. Benante and I would prefer the August 28th date. So I'm throwing that out to you guys. You don't need to say anything about it right this second, but if you could maybe get back to me sometime this week, that would be great, if August 28th would work for you. Yeah? So we'll see. The other thing I wanted to mention was, I wanted to turn over to Peggy for just a second. We've been talking about the superintendent evaluation schedule. So I don't know if you have it in front of you, but if you just wanted to make mention of where we're at with that.
Yeah, I don't, for one reason, because I didn't have a chance to update
I have it in
it.
front of me.
Oh, well,
actually.
it's got to be updated.
But it has
so-
to be updated,
It has
so.
to be updated. So I've been in communication with Dr. Benante in the past. Our goal always is to have this signed and in place by June 1st, which is a contractual mandate or requirement, and which often means we get Dr. Benante's materials sometime in April, and then it's a kind of leisurely process where we have executive board meeting and then we meet with him for some very good reasons. I think we want to push the date when we get the materials back from Dr. Benante, just because so many things are going on, until early May. And then what I just need to do is just sit down with a calendar. We'll probably still, I'm actually thinking maybe we would do our exec session, just the board, the night of the annual meeting. And then we could definitely get Dr. Benante something to sign by June 1st, but I think even if we needed to squeeze in another meeting before then, do the meeting on the 1st, we'll be fine. So I'm just a heads up, that's
So,
in the process, and I'll get you that timeline soon.
Right, oh, that's perfect.
I think that's really,
That's it.
That's a short version.
That's just a little foreshadowing to expect an superintendent evaluation timeline in
Really
your
happening in May.
inbox. And we might be doing some executive sessions in May surrounding that.
Yeah. I think there's a slight chance that we might have an extra meeting, but we
see what we can do.
figure that out. I think
Okay.
we could also just sign it and then have the meeting after it's signed, because
Okay,
that's my other thought about that.
okay. So that's coming. And that's it. Is there any communication from the public? No. Are there any board reflections to share? Dr. Benante, do you have anything you would like to share?
Nothing further, Jen, thank you.
Okay, then I would like to make a motion to adjourn. May I have a second, please?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Very good, thank you very much.